Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activists. My name is Dr. Carlos Diego Lopez, and today I have the pleasure of joining Victoria. Victoria, how are you? ¿Qué tal?
I'm fine, great. And how are you? ¿Cómo estás?
I'm doing great, thank you. And so my first question, Victoria, would be, what is your language background? And is there any language that you use for your research more than others?
All right, so I'm a linguist by my first degree. I grew up basically speaking only Russian, but from the age of 8, I started learning English. Then, when it was time for me to go to university, I started to learn French. And after that, I just added languages one by one. So essentially, I became a polyglot without even realizing it. But then at some point, I counted the amount of languages which I already speak, and I realized that my base is already quite big. So for research, I basically use English and Russian, but well, it's been so far. For my first master's degree, I also used a little bit of Finnish, but it was mostly related to. I didn't use it as a aim for my research. It just helped to understand the general context. So I wasn't actually going into researching something in Finnish. So for now, it's basic. It's mostly English and Russian also.
hmm Great. And I had two related questions to this. So you mentioned that you started learning languages, but you were not necessarily aware of being a polyglot. Was there any particular period where you realized there is such a thing as the polyglot community? There is such a thing as the polyglot gathering and the polyglot conference and other people with similar interests?
Well, it's thanks to my friend and French tutor. Well, the person with whom I practice French, his name is Patrick Houry, and he is
Hmm
the person who actually introduced me to HYPIA.
I
Uh,
see.
so yeah, we practice French from time to time so that I don't lose it and continue to improve it. So it's just in during one of our conversations, he mentions that he is a member of HYPIA. Then I asked him to tell me more about it. Then I read about it, and then I decided to apply, and I was accepted. So that's how I'm here.
Very interesting. And speaking of which, speaking of hidden stories, I was in another life, I was a secret Russian agent. I had an offer from a Tumen University, and I was
Wow.
supposed to go there and start working as an open rank professor in linguistics and philosophy, etc. In the end, things happened, right, with Ukraine, etc. And that never materialized. I ended up doing my postdoc at UCL, etc. But one of my concerns when waging that offer was what is going to happen if I try to publish in Russian journals or to publish something in the Russian language? Have you seen in recent years any difficulties trying to publish in Russian, whether it is the language or in Russia-based journals?
All right, so I haven't been particularly active in academia during the
Mhm,
last few years. So basically, my last publication was my master's thesis, which I did in
mhm,
Finland. But I know that the Russian researchers are currently facing some, well, it's mostly about international publications, but when it comes to Russian journals, to be honest, I'm not very aware of the situation yet because I haven't published a lot, well,
mhm,
at all during
mhm.
the past few years. But yeah, it might be because I know that they are constantly changing the rules of acceptance,
Right.
all those stuff. So from some of my students, I heard that they have to change some words, some wording. For example, that now they don't want any words which has a foreign stems. That they need to Russianize everything. But I
Mm,
personally haven't had any experience with that.
mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah,
Hey,
it is probably true.
Very interesting. And I also came across a Russian journal which is devoted to polyglossia. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I think the editor or one of the editors is Gregory something. Have you heard about this journal?
No, not really. No.
Okay. All right. So then you mentioned Russian and then Finnish and English as three languages that somehow intersect with your research. We would like to know more about that research. Is it related to film studies? How does your polyglossia intersect with your research interests?
All right, so Russian, English, and Finnish were the languages that I used up to this moment. But last year I started a new master's degree, which is in film studies. And
Hmm.
for this degree, I'm actually planning to use Spanish for my master's thesis because I'm
Hmm.
planning to dedicate my thesis to flamenco, which I've been dancing since I was 14 and which is
Oh.
my huge passion. So this was actually one of the reasons why I decided to do another master's because I believe that there are numerous wonderful representations of flamenco in cinema, and I would like to
Mhm.
learn more about it. So, of course, for that, I will need Spanish and Spanish of a very high level because flamenco is all about poetry and very specific vocabulary, but that's hopefully is to come. But until now, for example, when I did my first master's, I wrote my thesis in English and I investigated how the Finnish research model works. So
Mhm.
basically, all the documents that I had to read for my research were in English, and so I could read them easily. And I also wrote in English. And as for Russian, I did my first degree here in Russia, so I read and wrote everything in Russian.
Hmm. I didn't know about the flamenco part, and this was refreshing news. This is great. Flamenco is such a rich topic when it comes to the intersection of Muslim cultures or Garcia Lorca in literature, or even the etymological origins. So it's such a encompassing topic. So it will be fascinating to conduct research about it, and not to mention the flamenco as a way of life, right? As
Yeah.
as a living practice. Yes. And how does that intersect, this research interest intersect with critical polyglot studies? Which aspect of critical polyglot studies do you think that would be more useful for you to analyze these topics? Is it the polyglot industry? Is it the polyglot matrix and the preconceptions and prejudices that people have about the way in which other people learn languages? Is there any aspect in particular that you have in mind?
All right. So, yeah, well, first of all, I thought that it would be very interesting to connect linguistics with film studies because not many people speak two, three, four languages. I'm not even talking about polyglots and are experts in film. So, as I wrote earlier, I noticed that in films where there are some indigenous languages, some of them they don't get subtitles. So, whether it's a decision made
Mm-hmm.
by people who work specifically with subtitles or by film directors. But I noticed that it happens a lot and in films from different countries. So I thought that at some point I thought that it would be interesting to investigate this because even in the classroom when we discuss films which were given to us for homework and those films are, for example, in French and Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
All the other people except me, they all watch them in Russian translation, but I
Mm-hmm.
watch them in Spanish and French because I understand those languages. And suddenly it turns out that this part and that part wasn't translated to Russian, so I was the only person who, from the classroom who actually understood or at least heard about it, and the rest they didn't even notice. And sometimes those moments are kind of crucial or important for to understand the idea of the film. So I thought that it might be very interesting, a
Mm-hmm.
field area of polyglot studies to address. And I'm
Mhm.
not sure, but I don't think it's been widely addressed before.
Mhm. Definitely. I think film studies is an area where critical polyglot studies could branch out into. As much as I mentioned Arabic and its relevance for flamenco, I also think Romani is very, very relevant to that. Santiago, for instance, Betancourt in HYPIA has conducted research about Romani. He speaks Romani. And I guess it's one of those languages where you could potentially come across flamenco films where that language is not subtitled. And Spain in general is very interesting to analyze this phenomenon because, as you know, it comes from a recent dictatorship, relatively recent, right, until 1975. And part of the cultural expression of that dictatorship was to dub everything, not to use subtitles, but to do a voiceover in Spanish.
Mhm.
And that's part of the reason why Spaniards are now the best polyglots in the world on average, right? You always have exceptions, but it's the fact that we don't consume enough content in other languages. And when it's in other languages, it is typically dubbed or voiced over rather than subtitled.
Mhm.
I learned at a rather late age in my life that other countries are not like that. And I was shocked. Like to go to especially Scandinavian countries where subtitling is actually the practice, it's actually the norm. It's not the exception, but it's actually the rule. So I'm curious about the situation in Russian. How big is Russia in the divide between subtitles versus dubbing or voiceover? Does it favor subtitles more than dubbing in the content in Russian, or how does it work?
Actually, almost all the content is dubbed. For me, as a polyglot, it's some. I really sometimes struggle to find the versions which are dubbed in the languages which I don't understand that well yet. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's very hard to find the subtitled
Mhm.
versions because all the films which come out, at least legally, they are all dubbed. So in this way, perhaps Russia is a bit similar to Spain because all the films they are dubbed. Sometimes the dubbing is of good quality, sometimes not so much, but subtitling is not widely is not a thing here.
Right. So then you understand the Spanish situation much better. Um, yeah, I think in this case, the medium is the message, right? The fact that these films are dubbed, regardless of whether the dubbing is good or bad, already sends a message, right? Which is that the Russian or the Spanish language should be the by default option, which you could argue is a form of political control or even epistemic violence. These are, I think, are relevant questions from the perspective of critical polyglot studies as it intersects with film studies. And then to finish, I would like to ask you about your research plans, let's say. You mentioned that you're doing a master's degree. Do you intend to then publish your thesis, go into a PhD? Have you had your sight on any particular form of publication? Do you aim to publish in a specific journal or to publish a book in the future? Have you thought about these questions?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it a lot because it's been quite a few years since I finished my first master's, but then I realized that I'm not the administrator of higher education. It's not, I mean, I can work with it, but it's not my passion. So
Mhm.
that's why I decided to do another degree. And yeah, it's my dream to start a PhD, and it would be perfect if I could do it internationally. I mean, in another
Mhm.
country. But I think a lot. I've been thinking a lot about the topic now that I have a background in both linguistics, education, and now film studies. I was
Mhm.
thinking to kind of connect all these fields and investigate. Well, there are a few options which I'm thinking about, but one of them is to see how watching films with subtitles in different languages helps learners of the languages to not just to learn languages, but to boost their confidence and their self value. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm not gonna go into the psychological part, but
Mhm.
I mean, it would be very interesting to see if, for people who struggle with their self-esteem or who have
Hmm.
some problems in life, if learning a language and then understanding it in a film, if it provides any psychological
Hmm.
benefits. And the other ways, since now I'm planning to do my master's thesis on flamenco,
Hmm.
then it would be an absolute dream to continue it to PhD. But then perhaps I
Hmm.
would need to move to Spain, which would be great. But I don't know if me as a non Spanish person,
Hmm. Hmm.
if that could be a good idea, or perhaps I could also connect learning languages with creative movement such as flamenco. But then
Hmm.
again, at
Hmm.
this moment, I don't teach Spanish; I just speak it, so there are lots of
Hmm.
hesitations still.
Very interesting. So you mentioned a number of things. First one is the PhD. I don't know if you've come across this video on the Hyperpolyglot activist, which is how to get into a PhD program. I did that video because I had a lot of friends in Spain and elsewhere that asked me about, hey, how do you get into a PhD? As you may know, I did my PhD at New York University.
Uh-huh.
And so I have a bias concerning my own experience, right? But I would recommend to almost everybody to do their PhD in the US for a simple reason, which is the fact that it's all expenses covered. And
Uh-huh.
for a lot of people, at least for myself, it was a big reason. Money is a concern, right? So if
Right.
you can get full housing, no tuition fees, and 5 years guaranteed of stability, then it helps. Um,
Right. But
and I also think that, yeah, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but don't you have, because well, I haven't really investigated the US as a country, but I believe that you have to pay a huge amount of money to do your PhD there, no? That's not true.
No. So this is how it works. Tuition fees exist officially, right? And let's say tuition fees are $30,000 per year, right? For 5 years. But then once they admit you into the PhD, they'll pay you for that. So in practice, the tuition fee is waived. So in practice, you never pay any tuition fee. The US is very competitive when it comes to getting into the PhD program. But if they admit you into the PhD program, then they'll pay you full ride, all
Oh,
expenses covered. So that's the thing. Once you are in, you're in. And if you're not in, no problem because you don't have to move there to see if you are accepted or not. So that's why I recommend it to everybody. And I also think that, if you go to Spain to study flamenco, you're going to be competing against people who are born and raised in Spain who have been studying
exactly.
flamenco for their whole life.
Yeah,
It's just like me moving to Russia to study
yeah,
ballet.
exactly,
I, I'm,
exactly.
I'm against huge competition, right? Regardless of how good I am at ballet or which I'm not. Um, However, if I move to the US and I do the same research, there is less competition and there is more money to do that. So that's why I did the PhD in the US because where I was going to study is Spanish society.
Mhm.
There's less competition in the US and it's also fully paid, so it made a lot of sense. And also the universities are better, etc.
Interesting.
In the US. There is a Slavic studies school at Columbia University, which is very, very good. That's if you do anything with Russian. Otherwise, it would just be a question of applying to Spanish programs. Spanish, these are called language programs like Spanish, Italian, etc. But everything fits. It includes philology, which is what these programs include in Europe, but also cultural studies, critical theory, philosophy, film, creative writing. All of that fits within the language program.
Mhm.
And
Wow,
so that's the thing.
is that in the Columbia University?
Columbia University. So
Columbia.
this applies to all universities, but in New York City, in Columbia University, there is if you do something related to Slavic studies, there is a school of Slavic studies, which is one of the most important ones. Yes.
Oh.
Yes, so that's as regards the PhD programs, and also concerning the confidence and the self-esteem, definitely. I'm not a doctor in medicine either, but I can tell you that I think understanding films in another language are like the last frontier. You might understand podcast, speaking to other people, radio, whatever it is, but it's still, I think, another step to really understand people when they're whispering in a film. I find that this is a very, very advanced level. What's been your experience with maybe Finnish or Spanish? Did you get to a point where you understood a lot of the conversation in a film, and then that gave you a boost? Like, yes, finally, I've arrived to this
Exactly.
place.
It was like I did it moment, you know. So
Yes,
it's not just a standard recorded speech or even a podcast. Like it's a real, not real life speech, but I mean at least it's aimed definitely not for learners, but for native speakers. And when you get to
yes.
understand it, you have this aha moment.
Yes, definitely. I agree. So, yes, I'm really looking forward to working with you, Victoria. We will start in September, and you're very, very welcome to HYPIA Research 2.0, and thanks a lot for being here today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I'm looking forward to start working too.
Thank you.
Thank you.